What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolve video. Alright, soldiers, we are back with another Forestcraft deck breakdown. I'm excited to talk about this deck because usually most of the Forestcraft decks really do kind of play off of like a little bit of an aggro angle, but this one actually does go more off of a combo angle, which are some other decks, of course, in the past that we've seen on Forestcraft, but now in set 11, we have a pretty cool combo deck that's going to be playing around with our amulets. But of course, before we get into that, I know I'm going to roll the intro and everything, but I want to talk to you, soldiers. I am seeing your comments. Thank you so much for the love and appreciation. I am seeing everything that you're sending me. Trust, even though that I don't respond to them all the time, I know I'm just a bit of a busy person. So I want to let you all know that I do appreciate you watching and I do appreciate you leaving comments and helping out, of course, with the last video with the swordcraft that I was talking about. Thank you for the insight on more cards that we can put into the little budget deck because I personally believe that everyone should be able to play the game. Not actually sure how well the deck build that I did put in the last video would hold up against like a very competitive deck. Kagero. That's kind of like the deck to still kind of like watch out for outside of Earthright and stuff like that. But of course, don't let me talk your head off about all the other stuff. I just want everyone to know, all my subscribers, all the watchers, I appreciate you highly for watching, and I hope you enjoy this video. All right, soldiers, so if you already didn't know what deck we were going to be talking about in this video, we're going to be talking about Wasteland Forest. So if you have actually been paying attention for this set or when I was doing the reviews and everything, and it's okay if you aren't, people just really just care about getting into the decks and everything. We're kind of a week into the set already. So most people already know how these decks work, but I really do want to make these videos to give everybody some insight on what you might see, because when I go to the little text section, which I struggle with, by the way, every time I make these videos, is that, okay, what exactly can we put into this deck to make it a little bit better? So, if you haven't been paying attention, Wasteland Forest is going to be on the map this set. Now, I don't think it's going to be very competitive, but if you do sit across from this, I do want you as a player to know what to look out for when playing this deck. All right, so getting into the pros and cons. So here are the things that I feel like we can really focus on when playing for this deck. So in the pro side, if you have big plays, it has some pretty decent removal, big combo plus. So the more cards you play, the better things get. And then we have a very excellent mid game that goes along with that combo game. And then unfortunately on the con side, we have the early game. It's a deck that also sets up. Combo does kind of hurt us sometimes because, our play points really do hurt us in a way. So, having a big combo is a good thing and a bad thing. And then on the last con, we have no big finishers. All right, so I'm kind of gonna like mash all of these pros and cons into one thing. So, bear with me. So of course, when we're playing a big combo deck, focusing on the pros, excuse me, is that we are going to be making a whole bunch of plays in one turn. While on the cons, if we're going to be making big plays, that means we're not really going to be doing anything in the early game. We're really going to be setting up for a bigger plays, like, hey, I'm going to be drawing cards, or I need to play X amount of cards so I'm able to remove either 1 or 2 cards off your field. But there's lots of things that's going to be happening when playing this deck when they get over that 5+ play points. And of course, there is a little bit of a restriction on the removal, which I will get into the next pro here with decent removal. So, of course, removal can happen as early as turn 1, of course, with some decks. But in this deck, you're going to need a requirement of like X cards in either the field or EX area before you're actually able to start removing followers sometimes. Now, before I get too deep into it, I will probably hear some people say, well, when we go for a big combo turn, that kind of is our big finisher. But what I mean in big finishers, I do mean like a top end card that says, hey, this is a 12-12 card, or like a 10-10 card, like it's a really big boss monster that's going to swing in for some damage and really close out the game. And I know, soldiers, that I didn't put Storm in the pro section, which I usually do, but there is Storm in this deck, which you are going to have to look out for when playing this deck. All right, so let's talk about our legendaries, the West and the Wild. So we have Loxus Homestead Pioneer. So he's a 4-cost 4/4. You can evolve from 1, and 3 times on each of your turns. When you play an amulet, you can recover 1 play point. You can also engage 3 amulets on your field to draw a card. While over on the evolve side, he turns into a 5/5, and on each of your turns when a mount card you control leaves the field, you put a Dutiful Steed, Bullet Bike, and an Arcane Personal Carrier token into your EX area, then you give your leader +2 defense. You can also activate to banish 3 amulets from your field, and then you can choose one of the 2 abilities. You can either select an enemy follow on the field and destroy it, or 2, select another follow on the field and give it +3/+3. Alright, so stopping at Loxus Homestead Pioneer, so essentially on turn 5, you're going to be able to have those 3 amulets into the EX area. Unfortunately, Loxus does not spawn those amulets, so make sure you have already generated those amulets that you need to be played in that same turn so you can keep going up for combo. So when you play those amulets, you're going to be recovering those play points to a maximum of 3. When you have those 3 amulets on the field, you can go ahead and engage all 3 of them to draw a card. While evolving Loxus, which you should have the 1 extra play point from playing all those amulets, on once of your turns, when you do remove one of those mount cards, you're able to summon all 3 mount cards into your EX area to start doing them again in the very next turn if you want to, while also giving your leader the +2 defense, some life recovery as well. And then on the activate ability, we're going to be getting rid of all 3 of those amulets to either have some hard removal or to give another follow on our field +3/+3. And of course, looking at our last legendary card here, so we have Shamu and Shama, Polished Felines, which is a 1-cost 1/1 with Storm. When they come into play, you can select the enemy follow on the field, and then combo 5, you can deal it 3 damage. They also have a strike ability, combo 3, to give this follower +1/+1. So essentially how the legendaries are going to work together, you're going to be spawning out all those amulets in 1 turn. Combo 5 isn't going to be something crazy since you have extra play points. Now, this isn't something that you will be doing on turn 5 unless you have an Evo or something like that, but you're able to go ahead and do Shamo and Shama to go ahead and have that Storm, and then with the Loxus Evolve, you can actually turn this into a 4/4, which actually turns herself into a 5/5 when she swings. Now, mind you, a 1-cost 5/5 actually does seem pretty nice and real, but you do have to be wary of yourself when your opponent does have more play points, because they could just hard remove it on your turn. Alright, so these aren't all the mount spawners, but these are going to be the early game mount spawners that are really going to be helping you generate what you need for your game plan. So of course we have our Quixotic Adventurer that can help us put on some early pressure by being a 1-cost 2/1, which also puts a Dutiful Steed token into the EX area with Fanfare. And then we have Cactus Cowboy, which is a 1-cost 1/1, which also puts another Dutiful Steed token into your EX area, but last words, when he dies, you can select enemy fall on the field, and if there are at least 3 mount cards in your field or in your EX area, you can deal it 3 damage. And this is going to be the card that's going to be helping us like get some ping removal here. So not only do you get a 1-for-1 value by getting the Cactus Cowboy and getting a Dutiful Steed token, as long as you have 2 more mount cards either on the field or in the EX area, you're going to be getting rid of this follower whenever your opponent answers it to deal another follower 3 damage. Alrighty, and next up we have Vagabond Lizard, which I think is a really good card in the early game to help you with some early game removal to keep yourself alive. So he's a 2-cost 2/2, and when he comes into play, you put a Bullet Bike token onto your field or into your EX area. But when he dies, last words, you can put a Dutiful Steed token into your EX area. So of course, soldiers, if you are very familiar with the Bullet Bike token, it's going to bury itself to give a follower a rush, and if it's a Wasteland follower, you can give a +1 attack. So that essentially turns this Vagabond Lizard into a 3/2 with rush that'll swing in, and if he dies, you can go ahead and put a Dutiful Steed token into your EX area. Alright, and just to give you soldiers a refresher, I have the token cards here so we can go over them real quick. Alright, so if you don't already know with the Dutiful Steed token, it's a 1-cost amulet that's going to be able to bury itself off activate to select a follow in the field, and if it's a Wasteland follower, you can give it +1/+1. And then looking at the Bullet Bike, which I already kind of explained already, but it's the 1-cost amulet which can bury itself on activate to select a follow in the field, and you can give it rush, and if it's a Wasteland follower, it gets that +1 attack. And then unlike in the last video with Swordcraft, we actually are going to be using the Arcane Personal Carrier in this deck, which is also a 1-cost amulet that also buries itself on activate to select a follower on the field and give it ward, and if it's a Wasteland follower, you can give it a +1 defense. Alright, so a little bit of a oldie tradition that I really do like to see when I see Nature's Guidance in any list is that we are going to be bouncing cards back to our hand, and that is going to be absolutely amazing because when we bounce cards back to our hand, we can get fanfares again, and with cards like Nature's Guidance, we bounce the card back to our hand, replace a card like Nature's Guidance to go ahead and draw one, and then with the extra play points we might actually have in the later turns, we can play those cards again and generate more value. Alright, so let's talk some removal. So of course, from early on in the video, we'd already talked about the Cactus Boy, which we're really going to focus on the last words in terms of removal to go ahead and deal 3 damage to an enemy follower. But I kind of want to focus on Varmint Hunter. So he's a 3-cost 3/3, and during our turn, whenever a mount card is put into our EX area, we can select enemy follow on the field and deal it 3 damage. And of course, if we're going to have a whole bunch of extra play points, we're going to be using cards like Cactus Cowboy to go ahead and put a Dutiful Steed token to our EX area, pinging followers for 3. And then we can evolve our Varmint Hunter if we have those extra play points as well to go ahead and do the on evolve effect. So looking at the Varmint Hunter evolve, so he is a 4/4, but on evolve, you put a Dutiful Steed token to your EX area, which is going to proc his ability of dealing a follower 3 damage. Alright, and then looking at our late game card, we have Giant Pasture, which is a 6 cost 5/6. When it comes into play, put a Bullet Bike and an Arcane Personal Carrier token into our EX area, and then we can deal each enemy leader and enemy following the field damage equal to the number of mount cards into our EX area. So of course, if we already know simple Shadowverse evolve mechanics, we're only going to be doing a maximum of 5 damage both to leader and to field, which is pretty good because spending 6 to get a good board wipe is going to be nice, but you do have to make sure you already have those 3 mount cards into the EX area before you go for this. And I know you soldiers are probably sitting there saying, oh, well, Sparta, you didn't say that there was any late game or like big game finishers. Well, this is definitely a good card to really look at, especially in this deck, to go ahead and put mount cards into your EX area. And dealing 5 to the board is some very good wide removal, which Forgecraft doesn't really have a lot of. Alright, so let's talk about tempo. Alright, so I know I've brought up Fina a whole bunch of times, but I think she really is just making a pretty nice comeback, and I'm glad that I grabbed mine when I was able to, because I've been having the hardest time searching with this card. So if you don't already have your Finas, I highly recommend getting them, because they're going to be a reoccurring like neutral card that's just going to be very good in the future. Just having this ability when she's played to also just be a 3/2 on the field, if your opponent doesn't remove it, that's just 3 solid damage. But this fanfare of being able to look at top 5 for any 1-cost follower and adding it to our hand, or if we're just really willing to play on the back end and we have bigger cards, getting rid of a 1 play point follower is pretty good too. Alright, so I know personally that I did not include the Wandering Chef unevolved in the last video, but I think this card is always just going to be a staple in Wasteland. So this is just going to heal you for 2, and then on the evolve side, being able to look at the top 4 for any Wasteland card that you might need is going to be very vital in this deck. Now, I do want to give you soldiers a good little hint when looking at top 4. Please make sure that you get the most vital Wasteland follower that you will get, because if you don't get them, I'm just going to tell you now that there is not a lot of shuffling in a lot of decks. So when those cards go to the bottom of the deck, it is going to be very hard to be getting those cards back to the top. There's only like maybe a handful of decks that are going to be able to shuffle. And in my last regional, I looked at the top 4 cards, and 2 of my most vital cards that I needed went right to the bottom. That is the main reason why I lost. Alright, but enough of me crying, let's talk about some combo. Alright, so we have wonderful cards like Chipper Skipper, which are going to be able to look at the top 4 cards, and then we can put a 2 or less follower from one of them into our EX area, and they are free. And cards like Vagabond Lizard, which we are going to be playing for free from this ability, to go ahead and put a Bullet Bike onto the field or EX area, and then if we give the Vagabond Lizard the rush, we can take care of 2 followers on the field, while also putting a Dutiful Steed token into our EX area. And then we have cards like Anastasia. So of course, in the Anastasia turn, we're going to be recovering 2 play points. And then guess what? Shamu Shama is definitely going to be one of the cards that we played, along with some other cards that we know there's going to be the same cards that are played in Anastasia as well. Alright, so looking at the Revolving Bandit. So if you manage to play this card in the Anastasia turn, when you get her to the combo 5 or the play 5, it's combo 5. So whenever you do the combo 5 and you do buff everybody's stats, she's going to gain the storm. It's not saying, hey, if you manage to buff this thing's stats by mount cards, then it gains storm. Whenever this card gains attack or defense, it is going to have storm. So guess what? There are 1-2 cards that we both looked at, that's Shamu and Shama, and then Revolving Bandit. We now have the 3 if we played Anastasia in the first turn, or the first card, excuse me. We get those 2 play points back, and we can keep going for some more combo. And of course, with combo, we are also going to be using Sukuna the Brave and Small, because when we get into that combo 5, we can turn this into a 5/5 with Storm. And then with the Anastasia combo 5, we are going to be buffing up the entire board to turn this into a 6/6 with Storm. And naturally, with the combo plays, you're going to be going for these big turn combo swings. So if you manage to have the Loxus in play, and then you have another Storm follower like Revolving Bandit, which is just going to be pretty good to have on field with the Anastasia in the same turn too, to turn this into a 4/4 with Storm, and then Anastasia turn this into a 5/5. And of course, you can't evolve 2 in the same turn, so having the Shamu Shama and then having the Revolving Bandit, it's just a good 1-cost cards to have that won't be evolving if you want to go for the Loxus turn. Alright, so I believe that this is a good alternative line for the deck if you want to go this direction. So don't know when exactly you soldiers played the game or when you started getting into it, but we have a wonderful card that came out in set 1, which is an amulet that when this card does leave the field, you do draw a card. And imagine that you play this card and then recover a play point. Of course, you can spend the one and engage it if you want to recover 1 health, but honestly, you want to go for the Loxus turn, spend the 1 for the Harvest Festival, gain that 1 play point back, play other things, engage cards like Harvest Festival because you will be removing them on the backside of Loxus, and when you do remove it, you can go ahead and draw cards, so you're essentially drawing 2 cards. And then on top of that, if you really want to generate some hand size value too, you can go ahead and bounce Harvest Festival back to your hand with a Nature's Guidance to draw 2 as well that way. And then if you're not really liking the idea of Giant Pastures, we have Cassiopeia as an alternative to some removal too. So being able to put those mount followers into the EX area while also having cards in our hand from bouncing from Nature's Guidance is really going to fill up our hand pretty nicely if we're going to be using that combo. So being able to use this to select any number of enemy followers and dealing it X divided between X equal the total number of cards in our hand in EX area is going to be pretty good too. And of course, this is going to essentially fix the late game follower or the late game finisher card that we are going to be having. Being able to bounce everything back into our hand to have this big giant storm follower, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what's on the field, just bouncing everything back to your hand to have a huge storm follower swing for the rest of the game, because there are situations where opponents not going to have play points up. And when you play a card like this to surprise them, they're gonna be like, okay, well, you know, in a best of 1 meta, good game. Alright, so let's talk about some tech for the deck. Alright, so for those of you soldiers who struggle with the early game and need some good healing and some good defensive line, Orcus Puppet Girl is not a bad card to look at, especially if you have some evil slots that you're not really sure that you want to play around with. Having the Resolute Puppet turn a puppet card into a Lloyd into the EX area that's going to be free, that's going to be healing us and have ward, is going to be pretty good because our opponent's going to have a little bit harder time in that early game to be removing 2 cards like that. And of course, I personally enjoy having Fashionista Nekla in these combo decks just because you can buff up followers and then remove followers. I think it definitely comes into play when you have to decide, hey, do I want to get rid of this follower or negate this follower's attack? Or when we go for a bigger turn, of course, if you're going to be including the one of buffing up a bigger follower so we can swing in for some big storm damage. And then for those soldiers who want to play more to the mid to the late game, having Zilgenia the Great World is not going to be a bad choice too, just because having this follower come in and then destroying a follower, and then if we are at that 10 defense or less, healing the 5, and then having those 10 play points to banish the card to get the Oh Great World if you are going to be running the Evo, but come on, let's be serious. You're going to be spending the 10 to banish this card, and dealing 4 to the entire board and then to face every turn is really just going to add up. And alright soldiers, I know I want to always include something hot takey or at least something that's fun that you really do want to like take into the deck. So we have Winged Courier. So he's a 2-cost 3/2 with a strike to draw a card when he swings. When we really don't want to pay attention to most of these stats and abilities and stuff like that, we have to make sure to realize that this is a mercenary follower. So if we manage to miss off of Chipper Skipper for the Vagabond Lizard, Winged Courier is a card that we can also play because when we do the Chipper Skipper, our mercenary cards are going to get rushed while getting a buff on field too. Alright, so I'm not gonna lie, I have been enjoying explaining this Forestcraft deck because Forestcraft has a lot of play potential. That is one thing I will say, like you need to have a giga brain to really outplay somebody with Forestcraft. Now, I will say Forestcraft had its staling effect with Orcus Puppet Girl, like puppets just running the meta. Set 7. If you weren't around for that, you know, go ahead and enjoy set 11 for what it is, because we were in like a 3-deck format and we were stuck. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say we were stuck, but I want to say that having the 3-deck format, the format got stale very quickly. So the fact that we're on a very fast schedule in terms of meta, it's kind of like nice to see in terms of like pacing wise, but money wise and card collecting wise, it is a bit of a hassle to get a hold of all the cards because they're releasing everything so quick. But of course, getting back into the deck, of course, we'll talk more about how the deck maneuvers and stuff, but we're going to take a look at some deck lists that are from Shadowverse Evolved themselves that they have on the website, and we're going to look at a personal brew that either I crafted or someone might have already crafted that I just made and then just edited things around. Alright, so looking at the Evolved deck list that they have for us, so most of the cards that we did talk about are going to be in this deck. Now, we do have Goddess by the Sunlight Sea. I think that's how you say it, and I can't exactly see the words here because the cards aren't big enough. But this is going to be the card that came out in Idolmaster that kind of runs well with Anastasia to let you go ahead and recover a play point and draw a card while having the Anastasia on play to have those 2 play points that we did recover. So this is just going to be a very good card to see when we do go for our Anastasia turn. But realistically, this is going to have all of the Wasteland stuff that we are going to need, the Chipper Skippers to get our 2 cost or less followers, the Shamu Shama, of course our Volume Bandit, all the things that we need in Wasteland to really make this deck function. Alright, and then here is my build for the deck. So you know I had to include Harvest Festival in my build just because I'm an OG player, and I absolutely love when set 1 or set 2 cards are being able to play in the new set 11 decks. I love exactly like theory crafting in that way. But realistically, having the amount of cards in your hand with Nature's Guidance and bouncing and stuff like that is really going to be helping. And I think having Harvest Festival while removing all 3 of those amulets in that one turn for the Loxus evolve is just too good to pass up by engaging everything on the unevolved side to draw a card, and then evolving, removing all 3, and then drawing another card. But yeah, soldiers, I will be including the deck code in the description below, so check that out if you want to. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck. So I'm not going to lie to you, soldiers. When it comes to Forestcraft, things need to line up perfectly. Now, that's not always going to be the case, but when we need to search for specific cards, like Loxus is really what's going to be helping us. Anastasia is really going to be helping us, but mind you, we need to see all the cards that we need to see in one turn. So, of course, when we use cards like Nature's Guidance and Harvest Festival that are going to be helping us draw through our deck, of course, yeah, we're going to be seeing those cards quicker. But mind you, when can we fit in when we do those things? Because if we're not doing them in the early game, we're going to be doing them in the mid game, and that's where we want to be comboing. So doing them in the early game, if you're going up against the early game deck, you're really going to have a harder time in terms of like removing things and or like staying alive because you're like drawing more cards to see more of your deck. So it's really, you have to figure out when you're going to be doing things. So that's going to be kind of like a key element when playing Forestcraft. Alright, but all in all, the deck has a lot of situations and a lot of versatility to go with it. So, of course, sometimes you might commit to an Anastasia play, sometimes you might commit to a Loxus play, you know, depending on what your opponent is going to be playing. There are situations for everything, and that's what I really do love about Forestcraft. But this not having a way to really just like overlap our opponent, like, of course, we're getting into a big combo, but we're going to have to commit a lot of play points into that. And when our opponent is committing a lot of play points into their turn, you know, they're playing like big boss monsters that are probably swinging the same turn while also really filling their hand or getting rid of your board. They're just doing a lot of things in one turn with like maybe 1 or 2 cards. And low-key versus in us, when playing Forestcraft, we're going to be committing a lot of our play points into a lot of cards into the field. So, you know, we have to make sure we play everything correctly. And if you, unfortunately, are not very well versed in a lot of matchups, you're not going to have a lot of success unless you manage to really get under your opponent in that one turn. But personally for me, I want to give this deck a B+. Honestly, I would want to give it an A-, but you really do have to think a lot when playing this deck. So I know that's not really a criteria for a lot of people. Some people really want to go gung-ho, play low to the ground, get the game over with, play aggro. But if you want to play decks like this where you have to manipulate like follower stats that have Storm, we have Storm to swing for big damage, but we have to make sure we play everything right in the right turn. Now granted, this might be easier for some people and the deck might even go up to an A+, but I think for a beginner level or introductory level, which I kind of do want to kind of treat this channel for everyone to really know what these decks do, I do want to say it's a B+. I don't know if I'm going to be making like a tier list to be putting all these set 11 decks into anything like that. If you soldiers want something like that, put it in the comments below. I'll work on it. I'll try my best. That's the best I can give you in terms of me doing a tier list again. And alright soldiers, that is it for the Forestcraft breakdown. Now personally, I do have some free time on Saturday, so I'm going to try my best to see if I can get another video out. I know in the past I'm like, hey, you know, I'm gonna post tomorrow, and I never post because I end up being busy. So I'm so sorry for the past where I'm saying, oh, you know, I'm gonna post tomorrow or get ready for this video. I'm just going to forever now say I'm going to try my best, because I want to make sure I keep my promises with any of you soldiers that I do make when I say, hey, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to really try my best to post another video tomorrow in terms of breakdowns. But of course, like I always say at the end of every video, you soldiers, make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. TRINN, just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do, just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do, just to get you away. You pull me too close, now we hesitate.